What is going on, my fellow tech enthusiasts? My name is Hunter Isham here with Scinary Labs, and I'm here to talk to you about Proxmox Datacenter Manager version 1.0 today. There's a lot to cover. By the end of this video, you're going to be an expert in Proxmox Datacenter Manager, or PDM. About a year ago, Proxmox released their alpha and beta versions of PDM, and since then, they have added a number of features that have really helped the platform become stable and a competitor. I remember installing the alpha version back when it came out, and while the features were lackluster and not built out very well, I could see the vision they were going for. And earlier this month, they released that vision as version 1.0. While I believe a data center manager has always been on the roadmap, I want to say it received a significant bump on the priority list after VMware was acquired by Broadcom. After the acquisition, there was a lot of customers that migrated to Proxmox, and one of the biggest areas that other enterprise hypervisors had Proxmox beaten was the management of multiple clusters, storages, and networks from one location. This was extremely beneficial for individuals who, let's say, manage a wide variety of clusters over multiple cities and want to take actions such as stopping, starting, resetting VMs, or maybe even updating Proxmox nodes between clusters. Before, you had to know Linux to make that kind of magic happen. Now, with PDM, you can point and click and make all kinds of magic happen without needing any of the technical skill behind it. This is huge for Proxmox's ability to compete with other enterprise virtualization servers. Furthermore, this project doesn't cost a dime. You can download it directly from Proxmox's website and get it running in less than 5 minutes. That's what we did, and that's what you can do. Now that we've introduced PDM a little bit, let's talk about some of the key points that Proxmox is bringing to the table with PDM. First up, we have our centralized overview and metrics dashboards that they like to brag about. Everyone loves a nice dashboard that they can quickly analyze for performance issues from. However, I do want to note that since they migrated to Debian 13, Proxmox upped their dashboard game. I believe a big part of this was their rewriting of back and front-end components from Perl and JavaScript and C to Rust. For example, in Proxmox Virtual Environment, they added CPU, memory, and I/O pressure stall graphs. These are interesting metrics that help system administrators understand when bottlenecks might be occurring and around what hardware those bottlenecks could be occurring. Here is the Proxmox Datacenter Manager dashboard. At the top left here, we have the ability to see if we can access all of our remotes, and not only that, we can add PVE and PBS nodes directly from the dashboard. Those nodes will then let us know if they're online and reachable, whether they're a PVE or PBS node. Some other quick statistics we get on this dashboard: we get to see all of our virtual machines and their statuses, the Linux containers and their statuses, and the data stores and their statuses. One quick complaint I do have is that it seems to be organized by PVE, PVE, PBS, PVE, PBS, and that could be a little bit difficult to understand. I think they should put the Linux containers to the left of the backup server nodes, and that would better organize the data, but they may be working on something like that. Under that, we can see our subscription status. We don't have a subscription. Under that, we get some very interesting statistics that a lot of system administrators are going to appreciate. First, we get to see our VMs or containers with our highest CPU usage. Those are going to give us a percentage of how much CPU they're using and what it views as a high CPU usage. This could be very good for detecting bottlenecks on certain VMs or containers ahead of time, especially, maybe something's happening overnight and you don't get to know about it till the next morning. The next thing we get to see is our nodes with the highest CPU usage. So not only do we get to see, how our VMs and containers are operating, we're also getting those same statistics on our nodes, both PBS and PVE. This is very nice to, look for any bottlenecks on CPU hardware that could be going on in your environment. To the right of that, we have nodes with the highest memory usage. And so we can kind of do a pretty good job of understanding how each individual node is handling or managing their memory. Maybe something's going on overnight that's causing the memory to spike. We just wouldn't know. Under that, we can see our individual tasks and how those went. To the left here, we have it by category. To the right here, we have it by failed task. This could be interesting for auditing purposes to see, maybe there's an issue with permissions. Maybe certain people don't have access to certain nodes or virtual machines, containers, file storage with Ceph or high availability. You can detect those ahead of time and provide those so that way people and users aren't running into issues. On the right here, we can see our SDN zones. We could see the status of those, if we're having any issues, if they need to be updated, if there's any errors with the configurations, and we can manage that from here. So overall, this dashboard, it's very nice. The next feature that I'd like to highlight is a role-based access control, or RBAC. For a lot of us, there are few individuals that need access to our Proxmox systems, and well, the permissions for those individuals stay relatively simple. However, there are a number of organizations that have compliance standards such as FedRAMP, StateRAMP, HIPAA, or maybe even the GDPR, and they may require, granular access control. In these situations, RBAC can be the difference between providing users with what amounts to essentially having administrative privileges to only having read access to certain notes on certain VMs. For example, system administrators can provide necessary user accounts with the least number of privileges needed for them to do their job. This helps protect the organization and the system administrator's sanity. And here is Proxmox Datacenter Manager's access control. So you can access this by clicking access control here and then permissions. And so when you're adding them, you have the option to add user or token permissions. Tokens are going to be associated with API tokens here. And so when we go to add a user permission, the one thing I want to show you guys is that PDM by default, it only comes with two roles, that being administrator and auditor. Administrator has access to be able to edit things, while an auditor can only read certain aspects. So in PVE and PBS, you can actually make more unique roles for maybe different roles your organization may have and provide permissions to them. But in PDM, you're only given these two. So they can only read stuff or they can edit a lot of stuff. Not only that, we can assign it to users, and there we can actually add a path to what we want them to be able to access. And one cool thing about what they did in PDM here is they actually added the ability to filter. So we can filter by access, storage, SDN, DNS. So we can actually edit where or what paths people can actually look at or edit. And that's kind of the beauty of role-based access control. We give them access to what they need and what they need only. But that's enough about role-based access control. Now that we've talked about RBAC, let's move on to the next feature, cross-cluster live migration. This is a pretty big one for Proxmox. Previously, your Proxmox nodes needed to be in the same cluster for these types of actions to be able to occur. Heck, I remember at one point, live migrations weren't even a thing. However, in this day and age, we can now migrate VMs between clusters with just a few clicks. None of that technical know-how needed. I'm not sure how other system administrators handled that particular issue, but in our environment, we employ the 3-2-1 backup method, so we are able to restore our VMs from secondary backup servers. While that didn't solve the issue of live migration, that was our way of migrating VMs between clusters or nodes not joined to any clusters. The next tool that I'd like to show off is the ability to migrate from Datacenter Manager. So let's take this VM right here. Let's say we wanted to migrate it to a different node or to a different cluster. Well, we can do that directly from here. So let's go ahead and migrate it. So for this example, we unfortunately do not have multiple clusters joined into our Proxmox Datacenter Manager, but we will migrate it between different nodes. And so here we can see that just at the click of a few buttons, whether they're a part of the same cluster or not, we can have them migrate VMs to and fro. Now that we've talked about RBAC, let's talk about the centralized software-defined networking capabilities of Proxmox. Datacenter Manager. These leverage EVPN zones and virtual networks to achieve a variety of results. For many casual users of PDM, this may not be leveraged or even leveraged to its full extent. However, for corporate or enterprise users, this is a game changer. This enables system administrators to configure software-defined networks across multiple remotes or clusters and nodes. What if you had to manage a metropolitan area network or a network that was spread across the city? Using these centralized networking capabilities of the SDN, you can now build seamless networks across geographic boundaries or build consistent networking between clusters that allow for live migrations or restorations without, the errors that come up from mismatched networks or different hardware types. Finally, let's talk about the Centralized Update Manager. Now, using PDM, you can view the versions of all your PVE and PBS nodes and update them remotely. This is major for organizations that are trying to maintain compliance with patch management across major clusters or even disparate nodes. Now, at the click of a button, you can manually update and upgrade your Proxmox nodes. Furthermore, I wouldn't even be surprised if at some point they came out with a button to upgrade nodes between PVE or PBS versions entirely. Version 9 to 10, 8 to 9. Maybe whenever PDM picks up some more steam down the line. But now that we've kind of talked about some of the highlights, let's talk about some of the shortcomings of PDM. The first one that I want to address is the lack of two-factor support for certain actions in the GUI. If you try to use an existing account that uses two-factor, you won't be able to add a cluster as a remote in PDM, or even the node. This isn't that hard to work around, as you just have to tie it to an API key instead, but it's just something that's there that doesn't quite work if it's not configured correctly. Another thing is the lack of support for Mail Gateway. While this seems to be the least used out of the trio of products, I would imagine having easy management via PDM would encourage more users to attempt to use the Mail Gateway. The next complaint or shortcoming would be the lack of customizable dashboards. They showed us that they can modify the dashboards in version 9, however the information they have is still pretty limited. It'd be very nice to be able to display metrics similar to that of something like InfluxDB, but I also understand needing a entire server to manage those kinds of metrics, but the metrics already exist there. Next, live migrations don't check requirements before attempting migration. This is one of the biggest grievances that many users are going to run into. If you attempt to migrate incompatible VMs between nodes or clusters, the failure is going to occur at the end of the migration. This can be extremely annoying due to the bandwidth and time it used in migrating the VM, all for it not to even work. My final grievance is, limited actions on the VMs and containers. We're given all these actions such as stopping, starting, resetting VMs, or even being able to shell into the Proxmox nodes themselves. However, we can't do anything like running console sessions or configuring the hardware on individual VMs. Datacenter Manager is getting close to being a one-stop shop for the entire cluster. However, you still need to log into the node or cluster in order to change those individual or granular settings. I understand how complex and complicated this task could be, but they all use the same API. So today, we've covered PDM version 1.0. Stay tuned for our next video on the best solution, bootable, and portable media. Thanks, and see you later.